Another lively night in Russia. In Volgograd, an electrical substation has gone offline. Things were tense in Saratov as well. Meanwhile, in Feodosia, everything is as usual. The oil terminal has been burning for the 4th day. 48 hours of truce. Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to a ceasefire. Ready for nuclear war, Finland has built 50,000 bunkers. Patience is running out. The US has issued a warning to Russia.
If Russia doesn't stop the war, are we ready to respond like this? In a way that only the US can. A new
meeting between Zelensky and Trump.
We will talk to Zelensky about the war. I've been told they want to go on the offensive. And we have to make a decision about this.
Hello, you're watching the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. I'm Vladimir Rapchin, here with you in the studio. Subscribe to our channel and like this video. It's quick and easy for you, pleasant for us, and YouTube's algorithms love it. And let's get right to it. To our topics, which we will discuss together with the spokesperson of the Ukrainian Volunteer Army, Serhiy Borchuk. Serhiy Borisovich, glad to have you here.
Likewise. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the forces of the Raven. Greetings.
Glory to the heroes. Serhiy Borisovich, we will definitely talk with you about the attacks on oil depots, oil terminals, and about Ukraine's mirror responses to Russia's attempts to plunge us into darkness and cold. But first, I would like to discuss with you the issue of the 26 ballistic missiles that were launched by the Russians last night at peaceful Ukrainian cities, none of which were intercepted. Is this because the missiles have been improved, or is it because we lack air defense systems?
I hope that we will gradually solve this problem anyway. I'm talking about air defense systems. It's abundantly clear that the current number of missile launchers and the sophisticated weaponry presently defending our vast skies, unfortunately, is simply not enough to adequately cover our entire expansive country. All the more so when we're talking about weapons like ballistic missiles, it's clear that there are critical infrastructure sites that must be protected because a strike on these sites could affect the entire country, and accordingly, it would impact both our economy and our defense capability. That's why today these types of weapons are being dispersed as much as possible. This is happening, and of course it's the military who are handling it as much as possible. Well, it's probably no coincidence that at the latest, already the 31st Ramstein meeting, they once again talked about how Ukraine needs an air defense system. That's priority number one. In general, when the results of the Ramstein meeting are discussed, we see that there is a decision from the German side. They will supply at least 2 more IRIS-T systems in the near future. These are the corresponding systems. Well, of course, Patriots are needed, and certainly not just probably, but definitely other systems as well, particularly those capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, because we understand perfectly well that the Russians have plenty of this stuff, and I put that word in quotes, of course. Plus, the North Koreans are helping, and unfortunately, their assistance has turned out to be extremely timely for the Russian side. And this was mentioned, in particular, by the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, General Budanov, on the eve of our conversation. So, unfortunately, these are the realities we are facing today. On the other hand, you remember the attack that happened quite recently as well. At that time, Kinzhal missiles were launched once again, and our air defense managed to shoot them down. This shows that the professionalism is still there. What we need is weaponry. We have the people, so we have the potential. But unfortunately, we still don't have enough weapons yet.
Do you personally expect an increase in the amount of Western weaponry or jointly produced weaponry with Ukraine as a result of the meetings that have taken place literally in the last few days? This includes Ukraine, NATO, and Ramstein.
Well, in fact, probably the most important result is that the assistance is not just ongoing, it isn't stopping, and it will be increased. It is coming in continuously. These can be various programs, such as when the Americans once proposed that Europeans buy weapons from us with their money. We are willing to do this, and the Europeans are willing to do this as well. And in fact, this program is working. You see, this fund is being filled, and it's being filled very actively. 19 NATO member states have already joined this aid package, and that's just one type. Plus, there are also direct American orders that were placed a long time ago. Now these packages are being fulfilled and are being delivered to our armed forces accordingly. Of course, the key point is having our own weapons. I think that Ukraine not only guessed the right strategy, but we actually managed to find the right direction to strengthen our defense capabilities when we started talking about it. About the creation, or rather the revival of our military-industrial complex, together with, among others, our foreign partners. After all, what happens in the public sphere, like the creation of joint ventures for the production of certain weapons or ammunition, we understand perfectly well that this is thankfully only a small part of what this iceberg represents today. Because there is a war going on, we cannot talk about what we have developed or where we will be carrying out certain tasks related to the production of various types of weapons, carrying out certain tasks related to the production of this or that type of weapon. That's why we need to focus on our own production. And today we are saying that 50% of the weaponry in particular is of course our own weapons on the battlefield, and this share will continue to grow. In any case, after the war ends, and it will end sooner or later, it will end with Ukraine's victory, just to be clear, so there is no ambiguity in my statement. We will still need to strengthen the country's defense capability, and we will rely on our own weapons, including long-range ones. And of course, we will also rely on the technologies provided to us by our partners. After all, we, in turn, can also offer the civilized world our technologies, particularly in the production of various types of drones.
Yes, and we can also build on the technologies that the enemy uses, as they are constantly changing these technologies, improving them, or, for example, altering their tactics. Not so long ago, single strikes were aimed at infrastructure, including energy infrastructure. However, they did not act as treacherously as they have been doing lately, although that did happen as well, maybe just not as often. When after the first strike, there is a follow-up strike, and this time, for example, using the same Shaheds, but now with cluster munitions, meaning with shrapnel. Why? In order to target the rescuers. What else? What other tricks is the enemy using now?
Well, essentially, offensive weapons always come first. Defense is always lagging behind. That is, if we talk about weapons like, for example, interceptor drones, they appeared much later than the Shaheds. Because with Shaheds or strike drones like Shahed, Geran, and even the same Gerbers, there were improvements being made, but the countermeasures appeared later. At first, for example, it was the classic air defense systems. Thank you. Then our German cats appeared, the Gepards. Then mobile fire groups began to operate actively, and I want to say right away that they haven't exhausted their potential yet, because I see people sometimes saying like, that's it, they've already been used up. No, today a lot of mobile fire groups are still shooting down Shaheds. So essentially, we've come to the point where it's necessary to scale up the process of drone interceptors, which operate on a completely different principle. That's why in some areas, we really do have to catch up with the enemy, who in turn is also conducting, among other things, military-industrial espionage, trying to find out what we are developing. Unfortunately, some things fall into enemy hands during attacks. Our electronic warfare systems might bring down our own drones, and of course they take our equipment, disassemble our models down to the last millimeter, and accordingly then they put it into production themselves, which is obvious in turn. And of course we also adopt certain things from enemy tactics and enemy weaponry, so here we have to play a bit of catch-up. But in any case, we can clearly see that the overall effectiveness of this particular work is still quite remarkably high. So once again, we inevitably return to the fundamental question of what, let's say, is the optimal recipe or precise methodology that will at the very least significantly reduce the enemy's potential strike capability against our valuable targets. Indeed, this concerns energy, civilians, and critical civilian infrastructure as well. Of course, these are preemptive strikes. First and foremost, we're talking about carriers, such as aircraft, for example, or launchers, if we're dealing with surface-to-air missile systems. And accordingly, this also includes the production of the military-industrial complex, the storage bases, arsenals where ammunition is kept, Shaheds, the sites from which all of this is launched. These are the things that need to be destroyed in advance. So, in fact, we've come back again to what we've been talking about, the common denominator of all the answers I've given up to this point. Long-range weapons that will allow us to change the situation, including on the battlefield. This isn't a miracle weapon. Everything will work in combination. But in any case, it's something that will have an impact and on the theater of military operations and on the outcome of this war. Because today, as we meet, ammunition has already landed in the Mykolaiv area, Today, experts at this very moment, at this very hour, are already determining what exactly landed there, because there is a lot of talk that the Russians may have, for example, increased the range of their guided aerial bombs. In other words, unfortunately, the weapons of death are not standing still. They are trying to improve them. This is a threat because guided aerial bombs are truly something that for now cannot be shot down. On the other hand, we know that the relevant weaponry designed specifically to shoot down these aerial bombs is now in its final stage. So we can see that the process is not standing still. Yes, the price is high. Yes, it costs the lives of our people, the lives of our peaceful citizens and our soldiers. But in any case, the process is not standing still. This gives us hope that first, we will succeed, and second, that we really can produce things that can protect Ukrainians. And accordingly, later on, we can also share these technologies with our allies.
Long-range weapons are not a miracle weapon. I completely agree with you. However, notice what an amazing effect it has on the Kremlin. How do you like the outrage of their representatives? Of the Russian political and military leadership regarding even the discussion of possible deliveries. Yes, we're not even talking about any facts of Tomahawk deliveries.
Well, in fact, the Tomahawks have already started their strikes, meaning that in the informational and military political space, Russians are really discussing this intensely. We're talking primarily about the so-called Russian ruling class, and you can sense their fear. We all understand perfectly well, because obviously when they bring in Bulba-Führer and Lukashenko, it's to have him say and announce that this will be a nuclear war. Because Tomahawks are missiles that can, among other things, carry a nuclear warhead. Well, more scared tactics again.
That's not politics, is it, even for a second?
Absolutely right. Again, this is another attempt to shift the conversation to a different plane. Russia is trying to do this. We don't need a nuclear war, so let's do without Ukraine. We'll discuss with the nuclear states, particularly with the Americans, that they shouldn't supply those Tomahawks. This is very concerning. It's like an itch in the wrong place. So there's another point here as well. Obviously, this is being discussed today. There are many versions. I'm not going to repeat them now. I'm not going to talk about how many of these missiles we need, but it's definitely not 20, not 40, not 50. Again, where do these numbers come from? Who is throwing them out there? For what purpose? Well, I can guess, among other things. On the other hand, the Russians will have to respond, right? The question is, how will they respond? It's not just about strikes. It's about the fact that the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation will have to react, including with its military economy, including by increasing the number of such munitions. In other words, Russia has essentially been challenged. Do you want to enter another Cold War? With hot phases, that is, an arms race. Go ahead, start it if you wish. And here we can clearly see and understand that Russia is not ready for an arms race. They themselves indirectly admit this, because they say we have treaties, which Russia itself withdrew from last year, regarding long-range weapons, including those with nuclear warheads. But again, for 2026, we are so peaceful and good, we are ready to continue to adhere to these terms, these agreements. However, everyone understands perfectly well that Russia today is not ready for an arms race. For the Soviet Union, this was a very painful period, and the end of the Cold War marked its demise. And today's Russia is not even the Soviet Union. So there are a lot of aspects here, but I think I have managed to argue and clarify the main ones just now.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Sergei Borisovich, what do you think is the reason for such flexibility in Russia's approach to defining red lines? I'm not going in chronological order, but I'll try to reconstruct the picture this way. So, Abrams tanks, red line. After that, well, that's it. It's the end. Ukraine is finished, right? If Ukraine gets American Abrams tanks. Next came the F-16S, or at some point it was the F-16S. Then there were strikes on Russian territory, including on Russian oil refineries. That was also a red line, which somehow shifted, right? And after that, Ukraine was far from finished. Now it's Tomahawks. A new red line. From every iron, so to speak, on the territory of the Russian Federation, you hear statements, like those from Dmitry Alkogolovich Medvedev, that first and foremost, it will be worse for Trump himself. Even Peskov, who voiced information that these Tomahawks could carry a nuclear warhead, and therefore this means nuclear confrontation. Well, that's pretty flexible, you have to admit.
Well, that's Russia in a nutshell, right? Say something out loud and then try to deceive as well. In any case, there are red lines. Don't be surprised. I'm about to say something that may seem paradoxical at first glance, but I'll back it up with facts. So here are some red lines. You remember these conversations are thrown into the information space, including, of course, from the Russian side saying refineries, and here I agree with you, that's a red line. God forbid the Ukrainians start targeting refineries. That would be the end of everything. But on the other hand, let's talk about this situation a little differently. After all, Russia has always taken offense when it was called, because it's true, a gas station country. We heard it, we took away the gasoline, now no one will call Russia a gas station country anymore. But this is a red line that has turned into a victory, just a victory in the Russian way. In fact, right now, the energy infrastructure, yes, that very Ilyich's light bulb they were so proud of. So Ilyich supposedly invented this light bulb for them, although it wasn't actually Ilyich who invented it, right? Lenin only invented one thing in his life, well, two things. That was the October coup and the Leningrad region. And even then, he didn't know that such a region would exist. Well, accordingly, today, the energy infrastructure is also being targeted by strikes. Maybe we'll talk a little about that as well. That's also a red line. It's a red line that, well, you wanted your population and the well-being of your people not to increase because that would worsen the demographic situation. Everyone is supposed to be poor. That's when people have lots of children. But it's not like you and I came up with this. These are the words of high-ranking officials from the so-called State Duma of the Russian Federation. So these kinds of red lines like social, economic, military, they really do exist today, but they're quite flexible. As I already mentioned, even with the arms race, it's a red line, a red one, but then suddenly a hazel bush disappears somewhere and a kokoshnik pops up instead. Well, actually, this isn't about us just sitting here and finding it easy to judge or thinking we can just throw our hats and overwhelm everyone. No, these are the realities we have to face. He always talks only about the most important things. Unfortunately, all these moments come at a high price. Our people are dying, our children are dying above all, and that is truly terrifying. But in any case, we have to get through this stage so that Ukraine truly never comes to an end. If we preserve our nation, preserve our country, I believe we will succeed. And as for Russia's red lines, there will be more, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Let's not reveal all the secrets.
Well, yes, just like their crossings. But that's not a secret anymore either. Surely this has already been seen before. Okay, mirrored responses. Ukrainian mirrored responses to Russia's attempts to plunge us into darkness and cold. Now, it's obvious, yes, there are reports coming in, for example, that power lines have been damaged in the Volgograd region. In particular, if I'm not mistaken, the ones that run from the Volgeskaya hydroelectric power station to the central regions of Russia. Well, it's absolutely mirrored. What are people preparing for, including in Russia? What do you think?
Well, as for it being mirrored, yes, I can confirm that because today the strategy of the Russian Federation is obvious. In our eastern regions, they are trying to create, and thanks to these terrorist attacks, they are succeeding for now, though I hope not in the end, they are creating an electricity shortage. Accordingly, in the western part of Ukraine, there will be a surplus. So, you see, there will be two different entities existing. This is what Russia is aiming for, so that here everyone would be half dead, yes, and mammoths would come back with dinosaurs. I'm saying this with irony, but it's no joke, it's serious, and Russia is actually thinking about this. On the other hand, our response is truly mirrored. After all, if we're talking about oil refineries, yes, it looks good for the picture. Sorry that I'm talking about this side of the coin as well. But every day we don't even report on all the substations in Russian media today. In reality, their situation with regional power grids is very critical. Let me remind you, I might be mistaken, but I think it was 2023, maybe 2024, when a certain energy infrastructure facility was hit in our temporarily occupied Kuban, somewhere near Rostov or Krasnodar, I can't remember exactly, but it was an energy infrastructure facility. And back then, excuse my language, the whole of our Kuban was knocked out from electricity. For several days, it wasn't exactly a blackout, but it was pretty dark. And this shows that these weak spots do exist, and today everything really is interconnected. The substation in the Volgograd region, it turns out, is not just any substation. It's not just for a few houses in some small village. It's really about what we've been talking about. All this energy, among other things, goes to the central part of Russia. So Russia really, I've looked into this issue, and whether you want to or not, you end up having to think about it and pay attention to it too. Indeed, these regional power grids have a very weak spot. And the substations, because again, what about repairing these substations? Where do you get the equipment? It's so hard for Ukraine that I'm even afraid to imagine it today. I know what it was like in 2022 in Odessa during the blackout and how we managed to hold on and what we relied on. Today the situation is different. Today we have experience. Today we are prepared, and today we have tremendous support from our partners. And what does the Russian Federation have in this regard? Hopefully nothing. That's why these kinds of strikes happen every day. Even things we don't know about yet, but gradually these substations, figuratively speaking, and not just figuratively, are being knocked out, and these are serious blows to Russia. Again, many of us say that yes, emotions should also be present here. Russia must be plunged into darkness. Each of them should feel what it's like to be in a situation where children are hungry because there's no electricity. That's happening too, and it will continue to happen. And I think this is the very karma that should catch up with every terrorist and every murderer. And they are murderers.
It seems like we've long since stopped making predictions about when the war will end or how much longer it will last. How much have we gotten used to that, right? Almost no one is offering any analysis or making any forecasts on this issue. People just say, prepare for the worst, and then maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised. However, lately there have been a number of statements from people worth listening to regarding how much longer the war might last. For example, if we take the head of Poland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, he says at least another 3 years, basing this on how much Kyiv has supposedly sold, and how much longer it plans to continue resisting the Russian Federation. There is a statement from Budanov saying that we should be prepared for the war to drag on. Why do you think this information is appearing in the information space right now? And in your opinion, what should we be preparing for?
Well, it's because information of a completely different kind is also appearing, like the war will end tomorrow. This is something that should demotivate Ukrainian society, something that should neutralize our unity, which we've always talked about, which we've been proud of, and which helps us, the attempt to drag us into all sorts of internal political squabbles. Like, come on, the war is almost over, so go ahead and sort things out among yourselves. Start fighting over petty issues, get rid of each other, and focus on the internal front, because that's also very important. And I won't be revealing any secrets if I say that the Russian perspective on these things, we can feel it because certain political points are being thrown out there, specifically internal ones. They want to set us against each other, scatter us into different corners, yes, and as for the front, forget about that. The war will be over tomorrow. But it won't end today, it won't end tomorrow. I'm not going to make predictions. I'm not Budanov, I'm not Sikorski. I can't see that far ahead, 3 years into the future. But if this is an attempt, and I think this is an attempt, let's say, to prepare for the most difficult scenarios of how events might unfold. For me personally, that's normal, because today we constantly live side by side with bad news. The bad news is that the Russian Federation still exists for now. But there will also be good news. The war will end sooner or later. I like that the Americans, I'm an optimist, but a cautious one, so I don't wear rose-colored glasses. But the Americans have started talking again about peace through strength. After us, after the Europeans, they remembered again that it was they who came up with this formula. And they're talking about it again. And it's quite likely that these are the steps that will really bring us closer to our peace. So, forecasts. One must be prepared for the worst in any case, but sooner or later it will all end. But it will ultimately end so that we can continue preparing ourselves again. We have successfully built a much stronger state. We have made the army significantly more capable, and truly this is what we absolutely have to live with. So these are the fundamental realities that we really will have to
face. Welcome to our important meetings. Serhiy Brachuk, the official spokesperson for the Ukrainian Humane Technological Army, has graciously joined our broadcast today to share his valuable insights. Thank you.